Hello, everyone. Today, it is really good to welcome another deacon. Angleena, welcome.
Hi, Sarah. It's really good to be with you. Thank you for the invitation.
You're very welcome. Angleena, we would like to know here in High Street about your work as a mission partner to Israel and Palestine, and particularly up there in the first place. Tell us more.
Yeah, it's really interesting because when I share my message, I share that I became a Christian at the age of 26. And within a very short time, a couple of weeks, I really felt like the Lord was saying, I've called you to the nations. Now, I didn't know what that looked like. I didn't know where I would go. I didn't know how it would happen. I had no money, no savings or anything. But there was this sense of being called to the nations. And I was called, I went to many places throughout Africa and Sierra Leone during the war and many different places. But I knew that I was called not on short-term missions, but to go as a missionary under the sending out of the Methodist Church. And then I was called to the diaconal. And when I candidated for the diaconal, I didn't realize at the time, but I never stopped talking about being called overseas because it was in my bones, if you will. And I got asked when I was candidating, well, what if the diaconal doesn't send you? And I had to say, well, I come under the authority of the diaconate, and if they don't send me, they don't send me. I just had to trust in the Lord. But I knew as time went on that it was particularly to Israel, to Palestine, but I had absolutely no idea in what capacity. I came here as with a group in 96. I came and did my sabbatical, and I was the first female guide in the Garden Tomb in Jerusalem as part of my sabbatical. But I had no idea how it would pan out being sent by the Methodist Church. When I candidated eventually for the ministry, for the mission partner, they ask where you lean to, where you feel called, but there's no guarantees. And when I was sharing that I was called to this part of the world, I was sent to Sri Lanka. And I was there for a 3-year post. And after 2 years, I became very, very ill with dengue. And as a result, nearly dying and not able to work for 6 months. I always say it was a mosquito that got me here, because actually I'm not allowed to go back to a country medically that has dengue. And so my supervisor said, after speaking about this place for a long time, said, do you think it's the time to go? So I waited for over 20 years longer to be able to come here, being sent by the Methodist Church and being released by the diaconal to do that and fulfill that part of my ministry, which always has the diaconal role within it, whatever I do anyway. And so that's how I landed up here in Jerusalem. And I had to wait a long time. But God's timing's perfect, Sarah, isn't it?
Certainly is. And I have to say, what a witness to patience and perseverance, waiting 20 years. That's amazing. So what is your role in your appointment? Tell us a bit more about what you do.
Well, I'm the mission partner sent by the Methodist Church UK. We usually have one that's from the US, and we represent the Methodist Church of UK and US and under the World Council of Methodist Churches. At the moment, I'm the only mission partner here. I have a local colleague that's an office manager, and some mission partners were due to come last year from the States to take over from my previous colleague. So my role here is that I come under the umbrella of the Church of Scotland because there is no Methodist church building. So I come under the umbrella of the Church of Scotland for my clergy visa to be here. And so that means that I do some pastoral work and some, by the way, it's not the role of the liaison, but by the way, as part of partnership with, as an ecumenical associate. So I preach and I associate minister there in Jerusalem and Tiberia. But from the office point of view, we have quite a number of projects within the West Bank and Gaza and within Israel. And they're particularly United Methodist projects, advanced projects. So we get to meet and go to various different projects. Part of that is to go with the church council in Gaza. I go to Gaza 3 times a year to meet people in Gaza and the projects in Gaza. We work with a number of volunteers that come from, we've had a lot of volunteers last year, 6 came last year from the Methodist Church, all women. People can come here as a volunteer with skills or without skills, but just a heart to come and to see what life is like in reality here in the Holy Land, and to meet the people of the land and to work within different projects. So I love that part of the work. And we're also involved in itinerary for groups that come. So we host and do the itinerary for Queen's Theological College for those that are training in ministry. I co-lead with Reverend John, my predecessor, Reverend John Howard. Every year we have a group that's called Living Christianity in the Holy Land. We work with different denominations within the West Bank and Israel, and also interfaith. So I'm the Christian leader for Praying Together, which is an organization that works within Jerusalem and within the country with Muslims, Christians and Jews that pray together once a month. So the work and the role is very, very varied. I'm also the minister once a month to go to Methodist. It's the only Methodist congregation, the Filipino migrant congregations that are Methodist, and they have a church that meet in the basement. It's a bomb bunker of flats in Tel Aviv, and they're without a minister, so I go there to lead their worship and for them to be able to have communion. They only had communion once a year when their bishop came. So it's very, very varied, which I love.
So what are the main issues that are facing you and your neighbours right now in January 2021?
Yeah, it's the same as anywhere else in the world. They are facing the COVID. Where I live in Beit Jala, Bethlehem, when it first came out, the COVID, they acted very, very quickly and they were able to contain it. But like everywhere else, people started to get fed up and think it was conspiracy or weren't abiding by the rules. And so the numbers have gone up significantly, even though there's been many lockdowns, full lockdowns, partial lockdowns, night curfews, the numbers have risen. But they try to keep the lid on the numbers because they don't do as much testing as other places. Israel has been reported as putting out the vaccine, the fastest in country to do the vaccine and to give it to people. But their numbers are the highest it's ever been today, and like most other places that are infected and struggling with the COVID. So that's an issue, but also there's the issue that this land, and particularly Bethlehem, relies on tourism. Well, throughout Jerusalem and other areas on tourism. And of course, all the tourists had to leave. There's no tourists here. There's very few foreigners. And so they had to leave. And that's really affected people's livelihood. People here don't have work. They don't have jobs. There are no other jobs to fill in. And so people are struggling. And I find that the communities support one another just to be able to give each other food and the basics that people need. And of course, there's that complication of people facing occupation where I live. So they live under terrible stress and strains of occupation. So with all of that, in one way, I look at how we are restricted in movement with this COVID, that we're not able to go, you're not able to move around, you're in lockdown, etc. But that's what people face all the time here. Lack of freedom of movement, restrictions, they can't go out, they can't go past the walls, they've got to get permits, they're facing military coming into their homes at night. So in one way, being restricted in your movement, which we find very difficult, is what Palestinians face most of the majority of them most of the time. So it's many different layers.
It sounds like we could learn a lot from you. So what's the one thing that keeps people going when they're living with all these restrictions?
I think it's that sense of community, supporting one another, encouraging one another, finding ways to cope. They've had to cope through so many different scenarios and situations down through the years and down through occupation. And so they are very resilient. And I find particularly the Christians, I find the Christians that are not able to go and visit Jerusalem, to go to the Holy Sepulchre or the Garden Tomb or other places that are significant for, and Muslims to the Dome of the Rock, that they are very resilient in dealing with the stress and with the ways of coping. Although one of the other issues is that we're seeing more and more conflict with individuals, with families here in the West Bank, not just only through the occupation, but through COVID. And there are organizations to help them and support them in that. So it's about community and helping and support systems.
And knowing that we're not on our own, even if we
Yeah,
can't physically see one another.
yeah,
Something we've been very much focused on here too. Yeah.
yeah.
So what are the main things we can pray for you? The people at High Street would obviously like to pray for you. What are the main things that you would like to ask us to pray with you?
Well, apart from the obvious about always praying about walls coming down and occupation ending, that's the obvious. But from the day to day, what I would say is pray about the vaccine, because for you in UK, the vaccine's being rolled out in other places, and as I mentioned, in Israel. But for the West Bank and for Gaza, at the moment, there's no sign of that. They haven't got the infrastructure, number one, for some of these vaccines that need to be stored in frozen. They haven't got those facilities, and they haven't got vaccines through yet. I guess the WHO will eventually, they will, and there's talk that maybe they'll get a vaccine from Russia. But where other people in Israel and around the world are getting vaccines, they aren't, and particular Gaza as well. Gaza that's under siege, and in that highly densely populated, the numbers are going up, the infections are going up, it's critical, but we need the vaccine, they need the vaccine. I can't get the vaccine because I'm not an Israeli citizen, and I'm here living in, although my office is in Jerusalem and living here, I'm stuck as well as to where and when and if I can get a vaccine while I'm here. I'm looking into the British Embassy, whether they can help, but so it's not a guarantee for people here. And so to really pray about the issue that all people, wherever in the world, will have that opportunity of being vaccinated.
Yes. And how can we support you and your work now and in the future? What would you want to say to the folks at High Street?
I'd say if you haven't already, to be here and this country is very complex, and as you know, situation, it's beautiful, it's very complex. But if you have opportunity to read and to learn more about the situation here, and I would recommend reading Archbishop Elias Shakur's book, Blood Brothers. It's a really amazing book that gives good insight as well as humor and sadness about what reality is for people that live here. He will say that about in his book that if you if you love the Palestinians and you hate Jews, you're no friend of the Palestinian. That we are brothers in this, and his book is very, very powerful. So read up about the situation. But if you have the opportunity, if you haven't, to when COVID ends, and I know people look forward to being able to travel, come. They need the tourism. Maybe organize a trip. They're desperate for tourism throughout the land, and we get involved in doing people's itineraries for small groups or whatever. That is not only to visit the holy sites, but to meet the people on the ground, Muslims, Christians, and Jews, Shabbat meals, going to the synagogue, to experience what it is and to listen to the stories of all the people of the land, if you're able to come and visit. But also, if you know, or if you're able to, the opportunity to volunteer as a member of the Methodist Church, or if you're an adherent to the Methodist Church, to be able to come and volunteer and learn more and just have that heart to come and see. The Palestinians say, come and see and go and tell. And I know that's not possible now, but maybe in the future, that is something positive to be able to help, or to look online and find places where they are selling crafts from the Holy Land, because of course that side of the olive making, etc., is very important, and people haven't got that avenue to be able to sell to the tourists. So there are options to be able to buy things online from the Holy Land that helps the people and the artists here.
Thank you. Come and see and go and tell. What good words to end our conversation. But before we go, let's just pray.
Thank
Loving
you, Sarah.
God, we pray for Angleena and the work of the liaison office in Israel and Palestine. And we hear her call, her request for us to pray that the vaccines will be available across the whole world, particularly in the area in which she serves, in which it's difficult to get the infrastructure. But may that infrastructure and vaccines come and bring life and hope. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. It's so good to be with you and to share with you.
Thank you. And thank you for taking time to share with us.